Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from God's perspective and the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with the biblical worldview. If you've been listening and you like what you hear, I hope you'll hit the subscribe button or leave a review. That'll let others know the show's worth checking out. Certainly helps spread the word and serve our mission to make a difference. So again, thank you for being here and thank you for helping us advance the cause of Christian education. If you've listened to this show before, you've heard me say a number of times that the knowledge we learn in school is not neutral. I've heard it said like this, and I think it's a good word picture. The brain isn't merely a blank storage device that keeps information and stores it before being sent to the heart, where moral significance is attached later if desired. You know, the goal of learning is to identify the ideas that are true or reflect the way things really are. We want our children to gain right knowledge about the world. We want them to learn things that are good and valuable and things that will ultimately contribute to a flourishing life that aligns with God's design at creation. In other words, there's always a point to this knowledge. It serves a purpose because it's going to drive behavior. My thinking will drive my beliefs, which will then drive my values, which will drive my behaviors. That's what good teaching does. Well, because this is true, a child's mind cannot be separated from his or her heart. God's wired the human heart with a desire to make sense of the world, to think and to wonder and to evaluate as we learn about the world and everything in it. Well, this reality then has enormous implications for what content we teach, obviously, but it also has consequences for who is doing the teaching as well. The worldview of the teacher matters. The worldview of the textbook matters. And the worldview of the school system itself matters. Everything that goes into filling the mind will shape the heart, no doubt about it. And that brings me to my guest today because he specializes in this area. I'm with Billy Hutchison today. He's the Educator Specialist at the Colson Center. Before joining the Colson Center, he spent over a decade in Christian education as both a classroom teacher and an administrator, where he focused on academic excellence, of course, digital education, and the worldview formation of teachers and students. And he's passionate about equipping others to engage and shape today's culture for Christ. And really, this is kind of part two to our segment with John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Centers, and we want to transform that into the education setting this month. So, Billy, again, welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast.
Thank you, Cy. I am so glad to be here.
Well, again, it's a pleasure to have you, and I love that we're doing this back-to-back with John because I think that those that are listening on a consistent basis are going to find this extremely valuable as we really set up the big picture with him. Now we want to bring that down into the classroom setting and really talk about Colson and talk about education and talk about specifically what the Colson Educators program does. And we'll start, though, with big picture. So let's jump in. I want to talk about the credibility of Christianity, why the teacher's worldview is so critical, and what Christian teachers have to do in this moment to capitalize on the momentum of Christian education. So let's start with the mission of the Colson Educators program, which anybody can read right off the website. It's a great mission statement. And one phrase in particular I want to jump into, but the mission reads this: Colson Educators trains Christian educators to teach like Christians with clarity, confidence, and courage. And I love that. I'm always a big fan of, you use all those words that start with the same letter. That's great. Appreciate that. Our aim is to help teachers, administrators, and school staff create a school environment that is shaped by the Christian worldview and demonstrates the credibility of the Christian faith to every student on campus. And I love that last line, and I think that really catches some attention. Tell us about that last statement. What's it mean to demonstrate the credibility of the Christian faith, and why is that so important today?
Well, let me start with the second half of that question in terms of why it's important. And no matter who you are, we see especially with students, that there is a crisis of credibility among institutions. People will question anything at all that seems to have any sort of authority. And so now you put that into a school system, and then you put it into a Christian school, and now we have teachers that they are the communicator of the Christian worldview to their students. And this isn't just the Bible teachers. Let me be clear here. What we're doing is helping everyone to see that Christian education, if it's going to be clearly and coherently Christian, it must go across all of the different disciplines within the school. It is not just something that's outsourced to the Bible teachers. And so what that means is that Christian educators, if they're going to stand up and represent the Christian worldview in front of their students, then they have to know what the Christian worldview is. They have to have a vibrant understanding of the Christian worldview. And simply said, you cannot give away what you don't have. And John and I have talked about this on numerous occasions, but teachers do not just transform knowledge. They don't just transmit knowledge. They actually reproduce what they are. And so if you're going to be a teacher that is going to demonstrate the credibility of the Christian worldview to your students, then you have to understand what that Christian worldview is, and then how it comes to bear on your subject and how it comes to bear on life as a whole, because students are looking for answers. And we've all in our educational journeys have had that teacher that was just one day ahead of the students. And you looked at them and went, do they really know what they're talking about? We don't want to have Christian educators when they're teaching about anything, but especially when they're teaching about things of the faith, to not be credible witnesses to the Christian worldview. And so what we're doing at the Colson Center as a whole with Christians, but in the Colson Educators space, is that we want to provide clarity on what the issues of the day are and how the Bible speaks to those issues, and how the Bible speaks about what it means to be human and what it means to have an understanding of reality and truth and all those elements of a worldview. But we also want them to have not just the clarity, but the confidence to talk about these things and to wrestle with these hard questions, but then to also take a step further and have the courage to do so. Because some of these conversations, they're gonna be very tough conversations to have. In my experience, I had to have a level of vulnerability that was appropriate with my students, but to say, hey, I don't know. That's a really tough question, and I may not know the answer to it, but let's walk through it together so that we can find out what the Bible says about this. That's a lot different than just trying to fake an answer to students, because they'll see right through that. And so when we're talking about teachers being the source of credibility for the Christian worldview in the classroom, that means that our teachers, we have to understand, what does the Bible teach about all of life, and then how does that intersect across disciplines so that we can pour this worldview into our students as an act of formation and not just intellectual or informational transference.
You made a lot of good points there that I definitely want to come back to, and I'll stay on this theme just a moment on the credibility, because you're exactly right. All of our social institutions are going through a credibility crisis right now, and kids pick up on that, right? Social media, obviously, politics, influencers, they know it. I just had a conversation today with some people that we were talking about what's the difference between fake news and deep fake AI. And that's what the kids know. You ask any of these students, they'll understand what that is. But you ask most of us adults, especially my age, we're like, what's the difference between fake and deep fake? But the kids are there and they get it. And so, they know that this is really causing, like I said, a credibility crisis, because there's lots of competing ideas presented by competing authorities. So who do I trust? Who do I listen to? Who do I believe? How do you feel like in the Colson Educators program, how is this impacting kids, at least to what you're hearing from educators across the country when you talk about credibility? Why are they so desperate for that?
Oh man, that's a great question. And let me just speak from my personal experience first, because before I took this job at the Colson Center, as you mentioned in the intro, I spent 12 and a half years in the classroom with students. And what I found is that their questions, they began to get deeper, and they changed, especially as they got more with social media, and that you would see they would encounter different news stations. And you might have on any given day, depending upon how long they're on their phone, think of the number of different sources that are trying to speak truth into the life of a student, outside of their teacher, outside of their church, outside of their parents, outside of their friend group. I mean, that's four right there. And then they're on Instagram. And then how many different things are sent their way by some sort of algorithm that now they're beginning to question, okay, so what is true and what is good and what is beautiful and what is right and says who? And so because of that, we have a real authority problem. And you've seen it in the way that, before the vibe shift that we're kind of experiencing now, but you've seen how that people, anything that was institutionalized or old, it had to be done away with because they've got this idea that it was necessarily bad. And so when you're looking at a historic faith like
Yeah.
Christianity, and they go, wait a minute, it's old and it's been institutionalized, therefore it's wrong because all these other institutions have proven to be wrong. And so now you see how students are just awash in questions. And they're finding out, sadly, in some cases, that they'll go in one direction and try to live this out and find out it was completely wrong and damaging to them. And now are they looking back to say, hey, wait a minute, these people were trying to give me the right answer and build some of that credibility. And we're seeing some of that in some of the detransition stories and stuff. But really, again, to answer, put a finer point on this answer, there are so many competing voices in the lives of not just our students, but ourselves as well. And this is why this professional development that we offer through the Colson Educators program is so important because, as I said a minute ago, you can't give away what you don't have. And so if we're not clear on those things and we're not looking at what's authoritative and that we're moving and embracing this idea of modernity that, what's inside of me is authoritative, not what is outside of me is authoritative, then we've got a mess on our hands. And so we have seen this play out in the lives of students. I saw this in my classroom that students would say, well, wait a minute, I go home and this is what I hear. I'm online, this is what I hear, or this is what this movie tells me, or this is what this influencer says. But what does the Bible say, and where does that line up? And how do we have to say, look, the Bible is authoritative over all of those things. We don't bring our truth to bear on the Bible, we bring the Bible's truth to bear on our
Yeah.
lives. And so we have to bring that back to the forefront with our students so that they see here's the authority and it's grounded in the character and nature of God, which is unchanging.
Right. Yeah. Well said. I love that. Yep. And just, yeah, bringing it full circle, the whole idea that this is not a blind faith. This is a credible, belief system based on what's real. And we can show that and we can prove that. And yes, there is the element of faith there, and that's normal, right? We have faith in gravity that we don't see either. And so we use all these analogies that we, talk through with kids, but just showing them, listen, this is not personal opinion that you need to keep in a box, that they just get that all of the time, that, hey, yeah, that's fine, you can believe that, and you can even believe that it's true, but keep that to yourself. It doesn't belong in the public sphere. So yeah, I
Yeah,
love
and
that.
I'm glad you said that because one of my biggest influences was Francis Schaeffer.
Yes.
And he wasn't the first to say this, but we've been immersed in this understanding of truth that it's this two-story, this bifurcated level of truth to where you have facts versus values, or you have an opinion, right? And so if it's proven by science, it's true for everybody. But if it's not proven by science, it's your opinion,
Yeah.
right? And so, and therefore, we've swam in that water for so long that we have historical truth versus, a biblical truth or a truth in the English department. And think about even how universities were
That's
started.
right. Yeah.
Univeritas, right? We've got all of these that are pointing us to one truth. And now we've really got a bunch of like pluriveritas, right? So you got the pluriversity of North Carolina because you've got the English department has their own truth, and the history department has their own truth, and the math department has
That's
their
a
own
great
truth,
point.
instead of this unified understanding of truth. And because our students live in that water, they go, wait a minute, okay, so wait a minute, this is proven by science, so I have to accept it as true. And if it's not proven, and that just becomes so second nature. And we have to zoom back and say, all truth is God's truth. And so we look to what does math teach us about God? Math teaches us about God's precision, and science teaches us about God's consistency, and all of those different things that we look at so that our students see, wait a minute, Christianity does speak to all of life. It is not just a faith versus fill in the blank division.
So kids are dealing with the loss of truth, the loss of trust, no doubt about it. So you see those things at Colson Educators, and I know this has been developed and with your experience there, and it hasn't been too long, but I know you're all in and you've dove in and you're well qualified to do what you do. Then, what is Colson Educators then bringing to the table that Christian schools need to hear in terms of resources that say, okay, we know this is reality in which you live here. and you said it, professional development that we bring to the table. What are exactly you bringing to the schools that really is going to help teachers address? Because it's probably to some who might be listening saying, man, this sounds big. Am I capable of intellectually understanding what Billy's even talking about? Because it sounds like I'm going to have to go back to graduate school, or this sounds like it could be really, really heady stuff. Is this going to be overwhelming? How do you make it such that they can weave this into who they are as a classroom teacher?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so our Colson Educators sources or resources on colsoneducators.org. Right now we have about 11 digital courses up there. We've got the Truth Rising documentary course. We've got Truth Rising, the Study Educators Edition, that's going to walk through a framework of how to integrate the concepts of hope, truth, identity, and calling across all of your classes. We've got things like Worldview Formation 101, Worldview Formation 201, and those classes are designed. Number one, they're all free, so there's no reason not to take them, right? And you get ACSI CEUs for it, so free professional development that's powered by the Colson Center. And what happens is in these courses, we just want to open your eyes to how to think through things. Now, let me go ahead and kind of put it all out there. I've not taught second grade before. So if you're a second grade teacher, you're not going to go, okay, here's how I do this in second grade. No, 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 you're the expert on that. What I'm wanting to do is to put resources in your hands to where you can think and go, oh, here's some questions that I could ask at the second grade level that would not just integrate the Bible, but I'm actually teaching from a biblical worldview or from a Christian worldview. I'm not just pulling a verse in here or a verse in there. I'm constructing all of my lesson plans in a way that's moving them towards what's real, what's true, and what's good. And so all of our courses on Colson Educators are designed to do just that. And so we have folks that are taking these that are early education teachers, kindergarten teachers, all the way through some college professors are taking them, and even high school teachers. And so we cast this net wide so that it's not an intimidating experience to think about worldview. When you see it, you can't unsee it. When you see the questions to ask and you learn that process of what does it look like to evaluate a worldview, then you're able to integrate it. And it's not always easy, but it's fruitful. And we're here to support you and to help you do that. And so you're not alone. You're not on an island going, oh gosh, I have to have a master's degree to do that. No, you most certainly don't have to do that. In fact, I've used some of those resources with my students. And when I was in the classroom, and I had 11th graders going in to teach third graders on how do I understand worldviews through what's real,
Oh,
what's
wow.
true, and what's good. And so the Colson Educators, that's what we exist to do, is to equip you with that clarity and with that confidence and with that courage so that you can be that credible witness to the Christian worldview in your classroom. And let me just say, for a head of school like yourself, while we certainly want individual teachers to go through those courses, we have the resources to where you could say, we're going through the Worldview Formation 101 or the Truth Rising Educators Edition course as an entire school. And so what that does is it provides a common vocabulary, a common experience, and it really begins to start in motion the transformation of a school culture that's going to be everything is centered on a Christian worldview. And I would encourage you, if you're a head of school listening to this, don't just have your teachers go through it. Have your custodial staff go through it. Have your teachers' assistants go through it, because how they clean the building is an argument about what is good and what is beautiful. And there's a worldview element to that. And so what we want to do is transform the entire institution by bolstering it with a Christian worldview and handing you the resources so that you could facilitate those courses. You could bring someone like me on, or one of my teammates, to do a staff training, but to really look at how do we take this whole thing and move it towards really the goal of shaping true worshipers. I've got a degree in history, and really am fascinated by the space race. And while I didn't get to live through it, I heard that if you were working at NASA in Houston during this process, and you interviewed anybody, what is your job? They would say to put somebody on the moon. And so for every stakeholder in your school, their job is to cultivate and to form a true worshiper of Christ. And so cafeteria staff, they can take these and learn to think through, like, how does what I offer make a statement about what is good or what is true or what is real?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I hadn't thought about that. Like custodians and cafeteria workers, I'm going to have to ponder that. That's a great That's a great point, great analogy. Yeah, and I want to stay on that teacher training theme because I think that's a good place to camp out here for a little bit. I've read it several times that we struggle with, and sometimes in Christian schools, where even there we'll get teachers with what's called a hybrid worldview, and where they're bringing some sort of hybrid worldview in the classroom. And some people may have heard of that, but let's talk. What do they mean by when they say, "Hey, you're a Christian teacher, and you might even be in a Christian school, but you've got a hybrid worldview"? How does that show itself in education? What's that look like?
I think there's a couple of ways that this can show itself. And let me start with the first one would be the pedagogy
Mm,
itself. What we have found is that many teachers, and they don't do this from some sort of like nefarious
right.
purpose, they just teach how they were taught. That's how I taught.
Yeah.
When I started at the school that I was at, I taught how I learned. And what I didn't realize until about we were doing an exercise that our head of schools wanted us to do, and I went, wait a minute, hold on, this is actually deconstruction from a pedagogical standpoint.
Mm,
We can't do this. And so what happens is that when we have this kind of hybridized worldview, we might have the content of the Christian worldview correct, but our pedagogy might actually affirm something that the Christian worldview doesn't affirm.
mm,
So we may have, a deconstructive. We see this in Bible studies, right? What does this text mean to you? Well, wait a minute. That's removing authorial intent, and that's saying that truth is relative to you,
mm.
right? And so when we look at maybe an English poem, hey, so what is true for you in this poem? And it's like, well, hold on, let's be careful how we frame our questions, because what'll happen is that well, and let me give it this way. And these are two words that people kind of, they shudder when they hear it, but let's strip the baggage off of them. Our catechism, what we teach, must align with our liturgy, how we teach. And so if we teach in a way that is going to affirm things unintentionally that are not true according to the Christian worldview, then there's this dissonance with what we teach in the way that we teach it. So we need to have not a hybridized worldview, but a worldview that understands here's who we're teaching as human beings, and a Christian anthropology, and why we're teaching them from a Christian worldview, from a purpose, and for what end, what the telos of this is. And so now, as we operate both of those things together, they're both aligned with the Christian worldview. When we have a hybridized worldview, what can happen is that we can teach the Christian content, but we actually use naturalistic means to do it. And when that shows up, it breeds a lot of confusion down the line for students. Now, that's in the practical piece of it. From a more theoretical standpoint, we can have folks that think that they know what the Bible teaches about certain things, but because that they have these differing ideas of what it really means to be human, or what truth really is, this is my truth versus your truth, the worldview that they're going to hold to is actually not completely Christian. It's kind of like the buffet line. Well, I'm going to take what feels good to me, and most of it might be Christian overtly, so I'm going to call it a Christian worldview. But then when you begin to dive in and go, wait a minute, you really believe that about ethics or morality? That's not in line with what the Christian worldview teaches. And so again, that as that is presented to students, that removes their credibility,
Mm.
because they're hearing that same voice somewhere else that they know is not a Christian voice going, wait a minute, my teacher just said the same thing in class, or my teacher just did something that is going to present the same that material in a way that aligns with this, but I thought they were Christian and this source is clearly not. So where does that happen? So that's why this whole idea of a hybridized worldview is so dangerous. And that's what we're trying to do, is what is a Christian worldview? What does it mean to be coherently Christian, to where, you like the C's here, right? Now I have this
Right,
alliteration,
right.
put my Baptist
Yes.
background. So what does it mean that your teacher is the worldview communicator, that your curriculum is the worldview content, and your campus is the worldview culture?
Mm.
And all three of those have to be aligned with the Christian worldview, and they have to work together. And if they're not, we've got some messes that we may have to deal with, because we don't have a solid Christian worldview. We've got things that seem to work from a pragmatic standpoint, but they're not coherently Christian, to where when you step on a campus and go, okay, this is different. This is clearly Christian. What does that look like?
Oh man, you got to repeat that line. I love it. I'm gonna steal that sometime. What are those three C's again? You got to say that again for the audience. That's
So,
so good.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that the teacher is the worldview
Communicator.
communicator,
Yeah.
that your curriculum is the worldview content, and that your campus is the worldview culture. It's the manifestation of that culture. Now,
Yeah,
here's where
perfect.
some people push back a little bit is on that middle piece with the curriculum. And I've got some professional development sessions I do on this, but that doesn't mean we always have to use Christian curriculum.
Yeah.
In fact, what happened when I was in school, when I was at the school that I was at, what we did is that when we're teaching AP biology, give us the best AP biology textbook that's out there
Yeah.
so that we can equip our teachers to say what philosophical assumptions are underneath this textbook and how do we engage with them. So the students see that and they learn how to engage with it. So I'm not saying don't use Christian curriculum. I'm not saying don't only use Christian curriculum, but in your context, if you go, hey, our teachers are equipped to where they could say, hey, what's the philosophical underpinnings of this argument? And then how does that compare with scripture? You're teaching students to discern, which is a really good transferable skill.
No, I would totally agree. And I think at the K-12 level, yeah, if you're not going to use Christian curriculum, which, yeah, we don't, we give our teachers some flexibility as well, but we want to make sure that they have Christian curriculum in front of them to teach alongside so that they really, really know what it is that they're presenting. And so if you're going to put out there what you think is the best university textbook on this particular topic, that's fine, but just make sure you have Christian curriculum right next to it, because you better be able
That's
to
right.
help, walk in. Because what we see too often at the K-12 level is exactly what you said earlier. They're teaching what they have been taught at the university level, and they just assume that that's appropriate for this level, and it's not, because there's all kinds of assumptions there that a lot of K-12 teachers haven't spent a lot of time digging into, because they're mostly worried about the presentation, right? And that they've got 30 teenagers staring them in the face, or a 9-year-old staring them in the face, and they're just not worried about the pedagogy or some of those other things. They're worried about, okay, I've got a few fundamental truths I have to get across here, and hopefully we'll all hold it together to recess or lunch or something
That's
like
right.
that. Yeah, and hopefully Johnny won't get in trouble, and 14 kids won't ask me for a hall pass, and things like got a million other things going on. And in the meantime, they've missed maybe what was going to be essential about that lesson. Yeah, that's great. And I hadn't even thought about, you're right, about the pedagogy and that approach in terms of, getting maybe or lapsing into those patterns that we all do. Yeah, not only just how does this make you feel, that's an obvious one too, but yeah, what's this mean to you? Well, when you start asking that, you start developing these patterns, yeah, that starts getting kids to think that, yeah, whatever this means to me is ultimate reality. Well, that's not true. The author didn't mean that at all. Your
That's right.
response could actually be wrong. And who says
That's
who
right. And
says
it's
that today in government
especially,
schools? That's a wrong answer.
yeah,
No one.
you see this especially now as more and more teachers they didn't go to Christian colleges. And so they got their education degree from a state college, and in some cases from a Christian college. And I've heard from numerous heads of schools that they'll show up and they'll walk in and go, wait a minute, they're teaching from a secular worldview, and we're a Christian school. And they just simply didn't know any better because they just went and got their education degree from a state college and said, okay, I've got an education degree. I'm certified in the state. A Christian school hires them. And so that also puts a little bit of pressure on heads of schools through their hiring process as they begin to think through, like, what does that look like? And if you have that candidate that even though they went to a state school, and that doesn't mean that they're going to teach from a secular worldview, but what support measures do you have in place to help them see the difference and then move forward and continue to develop them?
And that's where I was going next, because really is, I think we need to face that reality in Christian schools, and that's really what Colson Educators is designed to do, to say, right, even in our schools, there's a difference between a Christian teacher and someone who teaches from a biblical worldview. And
Come on now.
that's the bottom line, right? That's it. And
Yeah.
I don't think we get that in public ed, because we know that teacher may call themselves a Christian, but we get that, oh, because of this erroneous separation of church and state, I don't expect my Christian teacher to teach my child Christian things because this is a government school. But in a Christian school, I expect my Christian teacher to teach from a biblical worldview. Maybe, if they know what they're doing, if they've a Colson educator,
Yeah.
perhaps, right?
Yeah, I hope so. And you hit the distinction so well. There is a difference between a Christian who, or an educator who's a Christian, and a Christian educator. You know, the way that we look at that, and I've heard this over and over and over, and it's one of those sentiments that, you know, I just kind of shudder when I hear it. They go, "Well, I teach the Bible, so I teach a Christian worldview." Whoa, hold on. That is not, those two statements are not the same thing. And so we have so many teachers that I've engaged with that they are, and they are just phenomenal Christians in terms of their love for Jesus and their passion for Jesus, and they're educators who are teaching and they're doing a great job, but they just simply did not know this concept of worldview and how it brings to bear on their pedagogy. And then once they see it, they go, "Oh my gosh, like how can I do anything but this now?" And so that idea of being a Christian educator is one who has a vibrant faith life and teaches in accordance with content and pedagogy that aligns with the Christian worldview. We've got a lot of people that are educators who are Christians that are teaching the gospel, but is their pedagogy aligned with the right understanding as the Christian worldview would articulate it? And if not, like once you see it and you hear it, then you've got two choices: either to go, "Hey, I want to refine my craft so that I can be in that Christian educator camp," or "No, I'm good. Here's where I'm at." And then that leads to some interesting questions to say, if you know this doesn't align, then what are you doing? Like, why are you here? What is your goal? Is this really a calling for you, or is this just a job?
I mean, I've been at this 34 years, all right? And I, you know, in a lot of groups, and I've done a lot of surveys. Hey, what do you want to have professional development on with, you know, CEOs, people like me who are running schools, principals, things like that? What do your teachers need? Top three every time, somewhere in that lineup, usually top two. My teachers need more effective biblical worldview integration strategies, training, something like that. I mean, it was the plague of, you know, administrator surveys, you know, year in and year out. And like I said, I've been the president of multiple groups for decades, and we do these surveys constantly. It just never fails, you know, and it's so frustrating because I'm thinking, how are we not getting this right? Are we, you know, what are we not getting our teachers exposed to? And because, you know, we all come back in our officers meeting, so to speak, and we'll say, well, we must not be giving them the training that they need, or they must not be doing enough personal study on their own. And sometimes I think that could be true, but I'm not sure that we're getting, you know, back to where we started. I'm not sure we're getting to the root of the problem here, where they really understand that, like you said, I'm a not only a Christian educator, but I see all of life from a biblical worldview. And that is just a different ballgame, because they just bring, well, I've had 4 years of college, Christian and or government school, and so I'm just going to bring that in, and I know what I'm doing. And many times, you know, they're really struggling, and maybe they realize that a few years down the road, I don't know, but their bosses see it. Yeah, plainly, that's for sure. Yeah, and so and Roger Erdvig has written extensively on that, and you know, in his book Beyond Biblical Integration, which I thought he did a great job with. And I know when I tried to reteach some of that to our staff and took them through it, and I really tried to couch it in this idea of let's quit adding, you know, Christianity to an already grounded base of knowledge, and say, okay, we're going to integrate Christianity into this base of truth that somebody gave us. I don't know. It just got spit out by Houghton and Mifflin or Prentice Hall or Pearson or some other curriculum company or my university or something like that. So there was what laid there, and I just pounded in the Christian truth. No. Let's remove that, and let's start from the ground floor and say, no, the knowledge down here is Christian. This is the truth. Like you said, all truth is God's truth. I'm going to teach from that as my root source of knowledge. And that's a whole different ballgame that, like I said, you may or may not have been trained to teach like that. And I don't think most have been.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, and that's where what we're trying to do with Colson Educators, is that we're not trying to provide a curriculum. We're trying to provide a formational experience, because you know this to be true as well as I do. You can have the best curriculum, but if your teacher is not equipped and formed, it's a terrible class. You can have a well-formed teacher and the worst curriculum, and they can make it into an amazing experience. And so what we're trying to do at the Colson Educators side of things is to show, like, how do we not just integrate? And I think Roger's book is phenomenal, that we move beyond that biblical integration, because what happens is that the failure in that, and many times, is that our teachers either are insufficiently prepared, or they have an insufficient process. And we walk through this in the Worldview Formation 101 course that, sometimes we either don't know the content or that we're going to try to say, okay, what Bible verse can we cram into this lesson? Or what Bible story can we cram into this lesson? Or what analogy can we use from Scripture to cram in here? And what happens is when that verse doesn't fit, when the story doesn't fit, or the analogy breaks down, the students go, yeah, I don't think that really works here. And if you're supposed to show me how the Christian worldview fits here, then what happens is, again, you're losing that credibility, which now is going to be much more of that institutional distrust. And they go, gosh, where is this? I don't see how the Bible speaks to this. And it's the same thing when I was at the school I was at, with the curriculum, is that we didn't want them to be exposed to certain ideas for the first time when they arrived on a college campus.
Yeah.
We wanted to say, hey, what are all of these ideas on the table? And let's engage with them to see which one best lines up with what is true that we see in reality. And so some schools do that very well, and some schools don't do it at all. And I would encourage you, don't you have to be appropriate age level, and yes, all those things. But if your students are arriving in college and they've never heard of Darwin, that's not a good thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Well, John and I talked about the significance of this cultural moment right now. And he said, hey, Christian schools, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm paraphrasing what he said. And speaking of Roger Erdvig, he called this the second renaissance of Christian schools. And I love that analogy. And I would agree with him. I don't go back all the way to the start of Christian schools, but I go back to the 60s. And, and I do remember what he's talking about there. So as you see it, and I asked John the same question, as you see it, what are the challenges right now before us if we're going to take advantage of this cultural moment in time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love John's answer. Right, he said it is the golden age, and it's because it's not because you've done anything at all. You just happen to be in the right place at the right time. And so I think about the Renaissance. I got a degree in philosophy and I got a degree in history. And when I think about the Renaissance, there are two things that really made the Renaissance happen: the compass and the printing press, right? And so you think about the compass and how that it basically shrunk the world. People were able to travel more. This globalization, it fueled all these things. It made the world smaller and more connected. Well, you also had the printing press, which now it democratized language and knowledge, and people could they could share knowledge freer. And now that you've got a compass and people are moving, you've got knowledge is moving faster, and it's going in areas it would not have reached before. Well, think about today. We have a smartphone in our hand that essentially replaced the compass, and literally has in some cases, to where now it makes everything smaller. And so I can know what's going on the other side of the world, and I can get those pieces of information from anywhere at any time. And you've got the internet, which has replaced the printing press. Anybody can publish anything at any time. You throw AI on top of that, and you throw how that AI is pretty much like democratized experience now. And then you've got things like algorithms that will put in front of you the things that it's calculated that you would enjoy, which will now shape your narrative and your beliefs and your emotions. And you put all those pieces together, and we've got students and teachers that if they don't know how to discern what is true and how to think through the information that's in front of them, then that's a huge issue. And so as a Christian school leader, here's some of the things that I realize that we have to think through as we look at this as like a second renaissance. The first thing is the cultural pressures of secularization that press in on our schools. Like, we have got to double down on our faithfulness to the biblical truth. We've got to engage people with courage and compassion, but what we have to do is understand this is the pressure that's coming from culture. This is the pressure to move off of our convictions in some of these areas, and we're just not going to do that. The other piece that goes along with that is that institutional trust that we talked about earlier, that everybody's skeptic towards authority, right? And this happened in the Renaissance. As people got more knowledge, they go, wait a minute, this is what I've been told. This is the essence of the Reformation. I was told all of this and it was wrong. How do we work through that? And then we have to form our students. It's not just about transferring information. It's about cultivating virtues like wisdom, to where they can look at all the dots of information and try to think about, wait a minute, how are people making these connections? So we have to teach our students to be critical thinkers in this overwash of ideas that they see. And then we have to also do that with our teachers. We've got to staff and we have to develop our teachers so that we're hiring the right skilled people, we're developing those people so that they can so we can invest in their formation, so that they can now stand up and and model, how do I wrestle with these issues? How do I teach this content in a way that's consistent with the Christian worldview? And then the last piece that some schools are really doing some creative things here are on just accessibility. Like, how do we find ways to make Christian education available to as many people as possible, regardless of their economics, regardless of their background, regardless of maybe some sort of learning differences that they have? How do schools do this so that with the Renaissance, you see this rebirth, is what the word means. We are in a renaissance of Christian education because of how bad secular education has been. And are our schools ready to equip themselves and their teachers and their stakeholders to take advantage of this moment that we've been given for the purpose of the gospel?
And I can't imagine there's anyone out there listening, especially if they are a teacher, who's going to say, no, I'm good there. I think as the world changes constantly, we're having these discussions every day in the classroom. And these teachers are, a lot of these teachers are millennials themselves now. We've talked about this before on this show, that the boomers have finally, many of them, exited the profession, and they're being replaced by millennials who, this is the world in which they live. Things are changing for them constantly. And so they get this. And so they're coming from that perspective, like you said, that's not so institutionalized, and is saying, yeah, I really going to have a handle on this, because it's even changed in the last 5 or 10 years that they've been out of school for their children. That's really the reality in which they live. Well, I want to talk about Truth Rising because John and I talked about it as well. And there's also a Educators edition, which I thought was interesting as well. And Truth Rising, if you didn't see the last show, John and I talked about that. That's a new documentary put out by the Colson Center, and then also a focus on the family. And so it's a great, great documentary. I'm certainly a proponent there and encouraging people. But tell us about the Educators edition. Why would schools be interested in that? And is that something? Is there 2 editions, or just the Educators edition, or what's the point there?
No, that's a great question. So we want as many people to watch Truth Rising because we believe in it, and the stories that are told in that, but also how Os Guinness just walks through an understanding of this civilizational moment, and then John provides this call for us to live faithfully within that moment. And so the Truth Rising Educators Edition study, it's separate from the film, so you can watch the film. You can go to colsoneducators.org. You can sign up for the course. After you watch the film, you'll get 1.5 CEUs from ACSI for that. But then Truth Rising, the study Educators Edition, has got 4 videos from John Stonestreet on hope, truth, identity, and calling. Each one of those videos is about 20 minutes apiece. And then after each of those videos, there's about a 5 to 8 minute video from me taking that concept of hope and putting it into what does it look like in our classrooms, for our classrooms to be places of hope, or for our campuses to be places of hope. Same thing with truth and with identity and with calling. There's also a video that looks at this matrix that we've put together and how do we integrate that into lesson planning. So how do I take the questions of for example, in John's video on identity, right? And so we look at identity, and he's going to talk about the 4 relationships that are established in the garden, that they're broken by the fall, but they're restored through the work of Christ. And those relationships would be upward with God, inward with ourselves, downward with creation, and outward with one another. Well, now, if I'm going to look at how do I integrate that into lesson planning or discipline, am I looking at just do we punish a student, or are we trying to restore them back to creation, themselves, others, and God? If I'm looking at a lesson planning and I'm teaching a novel in English, and I go, okay, what does this say about those relationships in terms of what is the problem, and how is the problem solved, and how does that compare with what Scripture says? We could do that with things in history like Marxism, and you could see he gets the relationships wrong and he gets anthropology wrong, so therefore he's going to get the solution wrong. And so the Educators Edition is designed to take those 4 videos that John has provided, and they're good videos to watch, even if you're not an educator, to just think through why do we have hope as Christians, and what does it mean that we live in light of truth? And John does a great job of delineating between the moment and the story and how that matters. And so, and then I don't in any world, I don't need to be the the closing act to John Stone Street by any means, but in the educators piece here, I just take what he said and say, hey, look, in that video you learned about this. Let's put some legs on this for education. And there's a study that you could go through, but this is contextualized specifically for educators. And so there's a resource document in there that if you want to pace this thing out as a head of school and say, hey, we're going to watch this one module per month, and here are reflection questions for personal growth, for practical application, for classroom application. You can create a newsletter and cherry pick some of those questions and send it out to your folks on a weekly basis. But it's going to provide that common experience from an institutional standpoint. Now, if you're a teacher that just wants to go through it, great, do that, and then give it to your administrator and say, hey, I think we need to go through this as a whole. And if you're an administrator, there is and I'm sure we can probably put this in the show notes at some point. There is a press kit that we can offer to you that gives you everything that you need to host a screening or a viewing party of Truth Rising. So it's got promotional material, it has newsletter, copy template, it's got slides, it's got a trailer. So you could say, hey, we're going to do this as a parent night. We're going to bring you all in and watch this and then show you this is why this matters and is important. So all of that stuff is available. Again, Truth Rising Educators Edition, you get 2 CEUs from ACSI for completing that. And again, those courses are all free. So there's no reason not to do it. And those pacing guides that are in those resource documents, you can do it in about 15 minutes a week over a semester. And I'm bold enough to say, as a former teacher, I know that every teacher can find 15 minutes a week in their planning periods to do something, because I was the teacher that stood out in the hall and talked to everybody else and went, I don't have time to do anything. No. You'll allocate time to what's important. And I think it's an easy thing for a head of school or an administrator to say, I'm only asking you to do 15 minutes a week, and it's going to change the entire culture, not just of your life, but our school as a whole, because here's the benefit of it.
Yeah, and are those available on the website? And just let's put the whole package together, not just what you were talking about, because I love that, the videos, but more about yourself, the Colson Educators program, Truth Rising. What's the best thing? Is all of this on the Colson Center website, or where should they go?
It is. So you can just go to colsoneducators.org, and you can see all the courses there that we have. There's information about who we are as an organization, how we can partner with schools, how we can partner with individuals to just do this thing we call Christian education. You can also email me directly. My email address is B Hutchinson. Let me spell that out because my southern accent's a little thick. It's just BHUTCHINSON at colsoncenter.org. And so you can reach out to me. I'd love to partner with you to give you more information on how we can serve your team or you as an individual and support you in this thing called Christian education.
It's a great stuff, and I so appreciate that. And like you said, I feel like we're just scratching the surface here of what we could talk about in this, and I love it. And here we've already been 40 plus minutes, and so I just really appreciate the time and the insight that you've given to this. And I think you're the right person for this role, and so I just appreciate you and what you bring to the table. And I certainly want to say before I leave, on a personal note, I've been through the Colson Fellows program, as I told John in our podcast, and we've used several of the Colson program educators courses with our teachers here at Mansfield Christian. So as speaking as someone who knows then from a firsthand experience, I certainly can't recommend these programs highly enough. They really are game changers for you and your faculty. So if you're like me and you're a school person out there, or even if you're a teacher, really consider what it is we've been talking about here. Every week I find myself using something I've learned, obviously with our staff, parents, students, and it's definitely made me a better thinker, looking at the big picture as I work through visionary leadership even for our school, and it's helped me to better understand the challenges that certainly lay before our schools and our staff. So again, definitely something for you to look into. I know I want to look into it as well and follow up even more so, because even after going through some things lately, even this summer, we're really focusing on, like he said, the truth, hope, identity, and calling. And I'm anxious to watch those 20-minute videos that John's put out as well, and that you you followed up with, because I think those are going to be really worth it for my staff. So thank you again. Let me make 2 quick chalkboard points for you to consider remembering as we close our show today that I really hope you'll walk away with. Point number 1 is this. Listen, the training of a child's mind is inseparable from the shaping of their heart. The reason we want our children to learn what is right and true and good is that this knowledge will drive their behavior. Right thinking produces right values, and right values lead to a life well lived. So if you want to see your child follow Christ with their whole heart as an adult, then start by filling their mind with the truth now, all day, every day, no exceptions. Point number 2 is worldview matters. What's taught in our classrooms today will be the worldview of our culture tomorrow. If Christianity is disregarded or if it's kept hidden from our children in schools, well, then it's going to be marginalized in our society in their adulthood, in politics, entertainment, and the media. That's exactly what's happened now. Seeing the world from God's perspective is a way of life that starts on the inside. It's not adding Christianity to existing knowledge from the outside. Rather, it's a worldview that informs everything we teach and learn. And therein lies the difference between having a Christian teacher and someone who teaches from a Christian worldview. Well, again, that's our lesson for today, and now you know more. When you know more, you can do more. You can not only think differently, but you can act differently, make a change, live out your convictions, and say no more if you must. Well, thank you again for joining me on the Clearly Christian podcast. I trust that now you do know more about what it means to teach from a Christian worldview and how the Colson Educators program can be a critical resource in worldview training for your teachers. So, again, if you like the show, let us know by following along, subscribing, hit the like button. That'll let others know the show's working out. I certainly would appreciate that as we try to make a difference here. Remember, the only way we're going to turn things around in our country is to increase the number of people who hold a biblical worldview. The greatest hope to get there is Christian education. I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this has been Clearly Christian. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.